Hi, I'm Paul Bates with GreatDad.com, and I'm here with another one of my weekly podcasts with an old friend, Jude Sandvall. Good to see you, Jude.
Hey, thanks for having me again, Paul. It's great to see you.
Yeah, Jude is a fellow coach working with divorced dads, and it's such important work that you do, Jude, especially as things evolve here in the culture. He has a website, the Divorcedadvocate.com. And we'll talk a little bit more about his offerings at the end of the podcast. But today we're talking about dads and dealing with guilt. So this isn't just about divorced dads, though I suppose that'll color some of the conversation, but just in general. And we were chatting a little bit before we got started about how the modern father has a whole layer of guilt that the dads of 30, 40 years ago don't have to deal with. I'd like to hear more about what you're thinking there.
Yeah, definitely. So with how just our society has evolved with women being more active in the workplace and many women just being the primary breadwinners, sometimes also things have evolved as far as the fact that men are just not the sole breadwinners anymore, or the sole providers, if you will, all of the time. And that obviously depends upon the family situation and the dynamic and the agreement in the marriage or the relationship and how you've structured things. But by and large, that there has been a great shift. And so now we're not only providers, but we're also caregivers. And then obviously with the men that I work with on a regular basis, they're divorced, and divorced dads then have this whole other component of having to be the caregiver full-time when they have the children. And so you're a provider and you're a caregiver. And so that is it's a great challenge. And hey, look, anybody that's listening, I'm not telling you anything that you don't already know. Being a single parent is a huge amount of effort, and it is a great challenge. And so with that comes this, what we were talking about a little bit earlier, is am I providing enough? Am I working hard enough? Am I achieving? We've got this masculine nature that drives us to want to achieve and do that. And then we're also needing to be a parents, and we're needing to, like for instance, I have 3 daughters. That has really forced me to focus on feelings and being able to carve out time to stop and listen and just talk with them and hear what they're saying, right? Not be in my not be in my masculine nature all of the time. And so that's a challenge. So and sometimes I feel like, am I doing it good enough? And I feel guilty.
Well, that's a really good point, because like you say, men are more wired to go from A to B, problem solution, whereas a relationship with kids is 18 plus, 40, hopefully 40, 50 year long ride. And it isn't just that, it isn't just one single day. It's a cumulative effect of all that stuff. So knowing just globally that you're doing it right is maybe slightly different than getting it right on one specific Saturday afternoon.
Right. Well, that's one of my other points too, is it's a lifetime commitment, being a father. So you can't measure yourself just by what's happened, like what the outcomes are. You got to measure yourself. Are you doing better today than you did yesterday? And that's particularly important if you're going through a challenging time like divorce, because everything's chaotic, everything's in transition. You don't really probably know exactly what's going to happen or how things are going to transpire. So the one thing I always say is you can control your emotions, and that's about the only thing that you can control, your emotions and how you're showing up, particularly for your kids. And just know that. And I've got the hindsight now of being down the road 10 years since post-divorce, to be able to look back and say, oh yeah, that makes sense. But I know the guys, anybody that's listening or knows somebody that's going through a divorce, that's the perspective is very, very different. It's really hard to see the forest for the trees when you're right in the middle of it. But just know that it is a lifelong commitment, and that if you just keep working and making the effort, you do better today than you did yesterday. You keep that mindset, then it's all going to work out positively. And it does work out positively.
So before we get into the 4 ways to deal with his dad guilt, one other thing is that I think is important to notice about that because men are stepping up and trying to be more, the society is expecting us to be more active parents, even though those of us who don't just completely love that job. Well, some of us are even staying at home and being not even being, financially providing at all. And we're getting a taste of probably that mom guilt that women have experienced for years and years. When I started GreatDad.com, the people laughed and said, a woman would never create a site called GreatMom.com because it was just too psychologically burdensome. But dads, if they showed up at the playground, they were instantly a great dad. But now, if you are staying at home and your spouse is working all day, traveling around the world, doing whatever, and you're at home, now suddenly that the house is, the way the house looks, how clean it is your responsibility. The kids get out of school on time, that's your responsibility. Doctor's appointments, all those things add up to just a lot of points where you question, did I do it right? Am I doing it well enough? Did I make it happen the way that's true to my values, or true to my my spouse's values, or what the community's values are, and all the rest. So it has changed.
Yeah, absolutely. And it takes a lot of communication around that, because it depends upon the dynamic of the relationship. And that can be a co-parenting relationship too, or if you're parallel parenting, that's more of the relationship with your children and how that's expected and what you're thinking. And that can be dynamic too and fluctuate, because maybe sometimes you're needing to work more and you don't have that time to be as great a caregiver. And now again, I'm talking about if you're single parenting, because it's impossible. I truly believe we are not meant to be single parenting. We cannot be both mom and dad. It is impossible to do that and do it very well. You can do it, but I know in the almost 10 years I've been doing it, there's just times where it's not. I just can't do all of it all at once, which is why God created us with men and women and moms and dads and that dynamic and the way that we're designed. But it's true, because then I feel guilty. I feel guilty.
Well, single moms have been saying that for years and years. They just I grew up with a single mom, and the job never ends, and she to this day, I'm sure, feels guilty about all kinds of times when she couldn't be there for me, and feels horrible about being a horrible mom. But she was a great mom as a single mom. She just did everything she possibly could, but still the guilt is there. So I guess we kind of treat it. We're kind of talking about the first thing about dealing with the guilt of dads, divorced or otherwise, is just realizing that the societal pressures are different, the expectations are different, and just being aware of that goes a long way to dealing with that guilt.
Yeah, exactly. And then the second one is just give yourself a break about it. It's okay, because it will be impossible. And I learned this the hard way, Paul, because when I just started to try to be super dad. And, that was impossible. It was impossible. And it was an impossible way to function in life. And so, that was staying up late to make sure the wash was done and ironing uniforms and making sure those were done and making sure lunches were made. And it's impossible. And then getting up and then making sure to get out the door. And then you still got to try to work and not be exhausted from work. And then if they're sick, it's just impossible to get done. So just give yourself a break. It's going to be okay if you don't get something done, or if you don't remember something. I remember my daughter she needed just a little, what are those, like little you play them in music class. They're
right,
like
the ocarina or the
something like that. And she had asked me, and I totally forgot. And weeks later, I said, "Oh, how's class going?" She said, "We're learning this song." And I said, "Oh," and then I remember I totally forgot. And I said, "What have you practicing on?" And man, it still gets me emotional, because I remember how sweet she was. She said, "Well, just my pencil in class."
Oh,
right. And I said, and I was like,
right.
I felt so guilty. I still obviously feel guilty about that,
I
right?
know. I know those
Because
feelings. You feel like you failed them. Yeah.
yeah, and then you feel like, and she was so sweet about it. It didn't really
Yeah.
care. And that's the other thing is they know and they understand the dynamic that goes through it and that it's going on, especially if you're open about those feelings,
Sure.
right? If you're open about, oh, I'm so sad, or I'm so sorry, or daddy messed up, or I made a mistake, that's okay. You can communicate those feelings with them because they understand what's going on, because they're going through some of all of those same feelings that we're going through too.
Yeah,
So,
kids, I think I found really appreciate the fact that you're vulnerable, that you make mistakes, and you're willing to own up to those mistakes. Coming back to the point about I think I don't know if that's number 2 or number 3, but the shame versus guilt, because guilt can be an alert signal. I mean, obviously, if you push it too far, it becomes something that weighs on you and is unpleasant. But it can be an alert signal that just says, "Wow, I wish I had done a little bit better. I should go to more of these school events or whatever," and that could be a motivator to tell you that there are times when you should step up. How do you differentiate between that when guilt is a positive thing versus a negative?
Yeah, so that's a great point, and I think we can just use the example that I just had this feeling come up in me that teared me up and made me feel really bad, right? And I've done so much work around this, and I do this with men every single day and dads every single day. So that's just to say it's an ongoing process, and that's okay. And let's just clearly define the difference between shame and guilt. And shame is that you feel bad, like you're somebody that is bad because of whatever it is. And
Not
guilt
just you
is
feel bad, but you feel like you are bad.
like you are bad, right? Guilt is that you feel bad about something, right? And so the example, obviously I've got some work to do around this issue, because if I was just feeling guilty about it, I would have just said to myself, oh, okay, this was a mistake.
Oh yeah.
I was okay. It happened and I can do better. And if I've done better, I see that I have, which I obviously have, because this is 6-7 years ago, Paul, right? That this happened. So, and my daughters are doing remarkably well. And obviously my middle daughter is not having any issues because I didn't bring the little piccolo thing or whatever. So that's an indication to me that there's some work that I need to do, that I'm feeling bad about who I was or how I showed up, or something about me inherently that's making me still feel bad about this situation. So if it's not something that you've gone through a process, and a lot of this guilt is tied in with the process of grieving, because guilt is one of the steps in grieving. And so if you have not grieved, and the grieving process is probably a whole nother podcast, right? Talking about this 5-step process of grieving. If you're not taking the time, and it's not a linear thing, like there's guilt in it, there's depression, there's anger, there's all kinds of stuff. They're kind of, the guilt and the grieving process are kind of like sister feelings that come up. So if you're feeling this guilt, maybe pay attention to the fact that you might not have grieved through part of what it is. And when I say grieve, we don't have in our society a way to go through the grieving process for the ending of a relationship or something like that. We do for a death. Right. But we don't for the death of a relationship, or the death of what you thought was going to be your family dynamic, or the death. It could be as simple as the death of not having the house that you had dreamed that you had built together and gone through had to sell. So it's an ongoing, thing that you have to go through, and you have to work through those steps in order to work through those feelings and understand those feelings.
Okay. So what the other the third way to deal with the guilt?
Well, recognize what it's telling you. Yeah, we were just talking about that. Recognize what it's telling you, because it could be that. It could be the fact that you have not grieved some part of the ending of the relationship, or if you're in a relationship, it could be something that's from your childhood. You could be grieving something, or it could be just a sign that you need to do better. right? It could be just something prompting you to say, man, I feel like I could do better around this. Like we were talking about earlier, I've been working too hard or not maybe paying attention to the feelings of my kiddos and paying attention to spending time with them, or I haven't carved out that time to do as well as I could with that, or vice versa. Just recognize what it's telling you, so that then you can take that, you can make those adjustments. Again, we're trying to measure ourselves from how we were yesterday, and if we can do better today. And it's just an ongoing thing. Like, that's a business philosophy, right? If you're not getting the outcome you want, then you look at kind of what you're doing and you make an adjustment and you try to adjust and do better. And then if you're still not getting the outcome that you want. And so this was a big one, Paul, that I learned, that the house, like the environment in my house, if things were off, it was usually an indication that something was off with me.
Mhm.
So if they're acting up, if they're being mouthy, whatever it might be. Now I have teens, and so I can't take too much credit for that also. But by and large, the environment, you set the tone for the environment. Sure. in your household, and that's whether you're a single parent or you're married, because that is how we need to show up in our masculine natures, setting this tone for our environment and leading in what that tone is. So if that maybe the guilt is saying, pay attention to this. Pay attention to your relationship with your spouse. Like, is that as strong as it? Have you prioritized that? Because that's going to have an impact on the kids and everything else. So it just pay attention to what it's saying. It's not going to be the same for everybody, obviously, because all of our relationships are different and all the dynamics are different. But pay attention to what it's telling you to do. Yeah.
Okay. And the fourth one?
The fourth is remember that it's a lifelong commitment. So, we hear about, so I work with divorcing dads, but I hear about men that then are able to go through this process, and women that go through this challenging, difficult time of divorce. And I call it breaks people open, because it's just awful. It's awful. I don't talk to anybody that ever says, yeah, divorce was awesome. I'd love to do it again sometime.
Yeah. Even the friendly ones are still.
Right. Yeah. It's very difficult and challenging, but out of that is an opportunity to grow and take these 3 steps that we talked about, or take the opportunity to learn about yourself, maybe what that unhealthy dynamic was that you brought to the previous relationship, or even this can be your existing relationship if you're having challenges or problems that you need to work through. And then you can get better. You can get better, and you can improve your existing relationship, or you can find a new relationship. But the key is to pay attention and do the work that you need to do in order to grow and thrive and have that next relationship. That's the challenge of what happened. And I speak from experience here too, because I just jumped into that next relationship, and wow, Paul, guess what? Same dynamic showed up. Wow.
Oh, wow.
And then the next relationship. So, wow, guess what? Same dynamic. Well, what's the common denominator to all of that? Was me. Right. So until I stopped to pay attention. And so I'm a little slower than the rest of us listening, but if you can pay attention, and divorce is a great attention getter to what it is that's coming up, then you can take the time and just know that it's an ongoing process, that you're being a father, you're being a good spouse, maybe being a good future spouse, and structuring your life and being the man that you need to be in order to attract and be in a new relationship with a new family, that you can do that. So it's just a lifelong process with your kids, with your spouse, with your future spouse, and just continue to show up and do the work. It's the most important thing, that effort.
I think if you can pull that out of the divorce, that you can take it as a learning experience. It's just sad in our culture, and hopefully things, are changing, that men aren't really expected to do much introspection at all and get ahead of some of these things. As coaches, we deal with this and trying to get people to understand what their why is, what their values are, try to live in accordance with what they think their best self could be. but a lot of men don't ever get they don't have the mental space or have been given the vocabulary or even allowed to within their, their social setting to even think like that. And it's a shame that it sometimes it takes a divorce to really look that deep inside yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. You take all of what you just described, and then you add the changing dynamics in our society of women working, and the changing of how that impacts a relationship and impacts a marriage and impacts a family. And then you put all that together. And I think we're really in a spot that's very challenging right now for relationships and marriages.
Yeah.
And then you get all the noise and the clutter that's out there of, it's his fault or her fault, or
right.
I'm better or you're better, which is not good. Not good, because not one side or the other side is better or worse. We're all in this, and by and large, for since the beginning of time, we've mostly been trying to survive together. It's just in the last century that we've begun to create these creature comforts where we're not just waking up trying to find our food. we're trying to survive Mother Nature killing us. We've got mostly that covered. And so what that's seemingly led to is looking for faults in everybody and everything and who's not doing what. And that's not the right way to go about it. If we were waking up and saying, how can I be better today? What can I bring to the world? What can I bring to the relationship? How can I show up as my best self every single day? That's going to be a much better mentality, as opposed to, he's doing that or she's doing that, or this person, or I'm a victim, and this, it's just it's very cluttered out there. There's a lot of noise. So if there's a recommendation, turn off the noise. Turn off the noise, get quiet, listen to yourself, talk to your spouse, talk to your children, spend that time, really zero in on that, because those are the important things that are going to lead to the positive relationships.
Well, yeah, any dad who's gotten to this stage, the kids our kids' ages knows that that's the most important thing over time, is spending that time and talking to them, and actually carving out time to be with the most important people in your life that really makes a difference. So we've covered the changing culture, changing expectations of dads. We've talked about shame versus guilt, which I think is really important. Using guilt as a signal that maybe you could be doing things in a different way, need to mix it up. And then the fact that it's a marathon, not a sprint, and you just have to keep focused on, the long-term impact. I'd add a fifth one too, and maybe we can talk a little bit about what you do, which is finding a support group, whether you're a divorced dad or a happily married dad. I think you've just created, taken the divorcedadvocate.com and made it into more of a group site. But having that kind of support network of other men who are going through some similar experience could just be invaluable. And luckily, the culture is changing in terms of saying that that's okay. It's not it's not like the Bob Newhart show of years ago where you get a bunch of crazy neurotics in a room. It's just guys like you and me, just who need to say, this didn't go well, or my daughter's having a problem, or my son is, whatever it is, and having other people who can relate to what you're talking about.
Right, you just aged us old graybeards with the Bob Newhart show there reference. But you're absolutely right, and I feel like that is changing, in that men are really looking for a different dynamic, because we have to. Things are changing, and if we want to feel healthier and to feel better, then we need to do that. And isolating anymore, sucking it up, just being a man is not healthy. And we're seeing that it still happens, because the suicide rate is so astronomical for men, and it's even worse for divorced or divorcing dads. And I don't know if you know that statistic. It is a huge. I would call it an emergency crisis, because it is very, very bad. So if we don't want that anymore, and we don't want to continue that dynamic with our children, which I know the men that I work with, and probably the men that are listening, don't want that, then we really need to change that dynamic. And part of it is is getting with other men. We used to have that kind of built in to our society pre-industrial revolution, where dads and grandfathers and boys were together more often in a more intimate scenario. And that's really changed. And we've become more isolated, and just our families and society in general. And then you throw in what we've gone through the last 2 years with pandemics and whatnot. So the isolation thing is really challenging, and men isolate, and particularly through difficulties and challenges, they isolate, they just try to suck it up. And I can't tell you the number of men that get on group calls and we'll be talking, and one of them will say, yeah, I cried myself to sleep last night. You just hear like a collective sigh of like, oh, wow, him too? Wow, I thought I was the only one. And that just opens up a much bigger conversation and helps them to talk more about things. So getting help is absolutely crucial. Getting help from people like you and the coaching that you provide, and the community that you provide at Great Dad, the divorce advocate community. We've niched specifically to divorce or divorcing dads, or men that are contemplating divorce. And we've brought all of our resources under one roof at the GreatDad.com website. And we've got a podcast now that it's been listened in more than 60 countries and 1,500 cities across the world. Paul, I thought I was going to just be doing this. I'm in Denver, Colorado, just have maybe a little practice here and work with some dads or divorcing dad. This thing is divorce, unfortunately, is across the world. And so we've got men that are that come on our calls and our workshops and stuff from all across the world. And so we've got the podcast. We got a new book that came out, which is Relationships for Men by Men. 10 of my other colleagues wrote this book, and it's just about exactly what we're talking about here. Men talking about their divorces, their addictions, how to deal with all of this stuff. It's a great book. You can find it at the website also. And then the membership site, which is really huge at the website, includes all of this: the workshops, the classes, the group meetings, the individual coaching, the books, everything. And you can find that at the divorceadvocate.com. And find all those resources, and just don't isolate, because that's the worst thing you can do. You don't have to do it. There's other men going through it. And even if you're married and you're struggling, there's a ton of guys and a ton of people, a ton of coaches like you that are doing great work, and it's incredibly important. I guess I'll end on that. If you can save your marriage, if you can do the work, that is always my goal. I hate to have men come to me, right? And especially a lot of men come that are contemplating. My first question is, is there any shred of thought that you can save this marriage? And if there is, I'll send them, I'll either work with them to try to do that, or usually I'll send them to somebody like you to try to work with them and work through that relationship and figure it out. So
I really celebrate that message. One thing I think is in the wedding tradition, there used to be that moment where the whole community, the wedding celebration was originally a group of the community coming together and supporting the idea of the marriage, and that marriage was a vow that would last forever, and that the community would support that marriage. And I think sadly over the last 30 plus years, there's been a lot more of the community coming together and saying, dump the bum, or move on, she's not right for you, or whatever. And I know, I just read an article just the other day by a woman, or was a tweet or something, saying, we shouldn't live in this fantasy that all married people should always stay together, and if it's not right for you, move on. And like, no, there are cases where there's abuse, or there's some irreconcilable difference, there's an addiction, whatever the thing is that really drives a complete wedge. But I don't know what the percentage is, but most marriages can be saved and fail because people aren't willing to continue with that commitment, because they're just like with parenting. There are rough days and there are great days ahead of you. And I think it's really important that dads all agree that we're all in to the largest extent we can be.
Yeah, you make a great point about the covenant. I think you're describing a covenant, right? A covenant with your spouse, and the community comes around to support that covenant. And the difference between a covenant and just getting married is that it's not transactional, right? There's a greater message around that, which is, you have a duty to the community. The community has a duty to you. You have a duty to your kids. You have a duty to your spouse to show up and to be the man and the dad that you need to be. And you're exactly right. We don't see that anymore. It's a transaction, right? Yeah. we're getting married and maybe it'll work out, maybe it won't work out. If there's something
There's a lot of starter marriages, right?
yeah, right, exactly. Which is
wrong.
Awful. Yeah, it's awful, and yeah, it's I think an indicator of a greater challenge and problem mentality that we have in our society that we're not necessarily going to be able to solve. But so for the work I do, I feel like if I can help dads figure that out through this painful experience and find a new relationship, because I am a firm believer in marriage. Now, I have not remarried yet, but I desire to, that if we can do that and create a relationship that is then models for the children, a healthy one that can break that generational curse, if you will, that continues. My parents were divorced, my grandparents were divorced, so hey, there's something to be said there in looking back, that I would like to stop for my daughters and have them going forward to know that there is a difference and there can be a better way. And if I can help dads that are divorcing do that and go forward, I think that would be great.
Yeah, that's great. Okay, well, it sounds like a good note to end on. It's really great seeing you, Jude. I love chatting with you. You've always got a lot of insights, both for divorced dads and just dads in general. And I'm joking up thinking about your story about your daughter with the flute, because those things happen all the time. They're heartbreaking in the moment, but quite often the kids don't ever remember the moments that you think are the worst, and then they find other things to be traumatized. So you just never know. It's a marathon, not a sprint.
You don't. Exactly. I've asked her about it. She has no recollection of it whatsoever. So it's totally my issue. But everybody be kind to each other, uplifting, supportive, and know that both sides are going through stuff. And so if we can look at things from that lens, it's going to be a much better world. So
yeah, great. All right. This is Paul Banis with GreatDad.com. I'm here with Jude Sandvall. He's at the divorcedadvocate.com. You can find more about my coaching at GreatDad.com and at paulbaniscoaching.com. Till next time, take care.